They laughed at your silence, until your silence became the sound of their defeat. My dear chosen ones, remember this: the loudest person in the room is often the most insecure. The quiet one, that's the strategist, that's the observer, that's you. They called you soft because you didn't fight their petty wars. They called you emotional because you felt deeply. They called you slow because you refused to rush into chaos. But let's get one thing clear: while they were busy performing, you were calculating. You were gathering intel like a master chess player, studying every piece before the first move. They thought you were behind. They didn't realize you were building something they'd never be invited to understand. See, chosen ones, there's a certain kind of power that doesn't make noise. It studies, it listens, it stores energy until it strikes with precision, and that's what terrifies them. You didn't rise by accident, you rose by observation. You didn't just get smarter, you became dangerous with clarity. People ask, why didn't you defend yourself? Because when truth stands tall, lies collapse on their own. You didn't need to scream your innocence. You simply outgrew their accusations. You stopped performing for people who misunderstood your peace for passivity. They mistook your silence for confusion, but that silence was you pulling the pin on your transformation. Every quiet moment they mocked, that was your mental training ground. Every time they said you changed, they were right. They just didn't realize why. The thing about being chosen is that you're not built for applause. You're built for impact. You move differently. You think differently. You process on frequencies others can't detect. And that's why they misread you. They can only measure what they understand. And you were never meant to be understood by shallow minds. Let's be honest. They never hated the quiet you. They feared what your quietness was creating. Because deep down, they sensed it. The calm before the storm wasn't peace. It was preparation. You weren't sitting still because you were broken. You were sitting still because you were downloading every pattern, every inconsistency, every hidden motive. And when the time came, you didn't explode. You executed. Surgical precision, cold clarity, no announcement, no warning, just undeniable results. Now they call you unpredictable, but that's because their old playbook doesn't work anymore. The guilt trips don't land, the manipulation misses, the bait no longer tempts you. You've upgraded your software while they're still trying to hack the old version of you. And that realization burns them from the inside, because they built their confidence on the idea that you were easy to play, and now the board belongs to you. Chosen ones, understand this. Emotional intelligence is not softness. It's power disguised as patience. It's reading every word behind the words. It's knowing when to walk away, not because you're weak, but because chaos no longer deserves your energy. They don't understand that kind of strength. To them, power is noise, control, dominance, intimidation. But your power, it's quiet, calculated, and untouchable. It unnerves them because it can't be provoked. You didn't become cold, you became clear. You didn't become arrogant, you became accurate. You stopped reacting and started analyzing. You became fluent in energy, in tones, patterns, and micro-expressions. You don't need evidence to sense deception now. You can feel it the second it enters the room, and that's why they panic when you look at them, because they know you see everything. There's something deeply unsettling about a person who doesn't flinch anymore. You're not playing their emotional games because you've outgrown the entire league. And that's the real victory. You didn't win by fighting back. You won by no longer being available for the fight. So when they whisper your name now, when they sit in circles trying to figure out how you got so composed, let them. Let them debate the mystery you've become. Because the truth is simple. They taught you everything you needed to know about human nature. Every lie, every fake smile, every attempt to control you became your training manual. They handed you the blueprint, and you built an empire of awareness from it. You see, they didn't realize they were sharpening your discernment with every betrayal. They didn't know their manipulation was upgrading your emotional firewall. You became immune to their tactics, not out of bitterness, but out of mastery. Now, your peace is your weapon, your silence is your strategy, and your clarity is the cage they built around themselves. You didn't just outthink them, chosen ones. You outgrew their entire system. And now they can't reach you, not because you're hiding, but because you've ascended to a level where noise no longer translates. So when you hear the whispers, smile. When they question your calm, stay still. When they test your patience, remember, they're playing checkers on a chessboard you designed. You didn't just silence the critics, you made them irrelevant. And that's the kind of brilliance they'll never recover from. And before we dive deeper, a quick moment. Thank you, my chosen ones. Whether this is your first time here or you've been walking this path with me from the start, your focus, your energy, your hunger for truth keeps this movement alive. If you've ever been underestimated, talked down to, or quietly watched people choke on their own judgment, then this message is for you. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop the number 11 in the comments if you're done explaining yourself to those who never listened anyway. Because what's coming next will feel familiar. The exact shifts, realizations, and sharp awakenings that happen when you take your power back and outsmart every critic who thought you couldn't. Only the real chosen ones will recognize these signs. So stay with me, and let's break it down, step by step. Number 1, they labeled your calm as weakness, not knowing you were studying the battlefield. They confused your calm for surrender, and now they're drowning in the shock of their miscalculation. Never mistake a quiet mind for an idle one. Storms don't announce themselves before they strike. My dear chosen ones, you already know this feeling. You watched them talk loud, mock your stillness, and call your silence weakness. They thought you didn't know what to say, but you were just choosing not to waste your energy explaining what they weren't ready to understand. They thought your calm was surrender. They didn't realize it was surveillance. You were watching, analyzing, learning their rhythm like a strategist, waiting for the perfect opening. And now that moment has arrived, and they can't comprehend how you flipped the entire game without even raising your voice. Let's be honest. They were addicted to underestimating you. It gave them a false sense of control. They needed to believe you were slow so they could feel fast, needed to label you too sensitive so they didn't have to admit they were emotionally shallow. But here's the twist they never saw coming. You were never behind. You were just collecting data at a level their impulsive minds couldn't even register. While they were chasing attention, you were mastering self-control. While they were making noise, you were sharpening clarity. That's why they can't touch you now, because everything that once triggered you has turned into information you can use. See, chosen ones, emotional intelligence isn't softness, it's precision. It's reading an entire room before anyone opens their mouth. It's catching what wasn't said and understanding what was truly meant. That's a kind of depth shallow people drown in. And that's why they mocked it, because it exposed them. Your silence reflected their own confusion back to them, and they couldn't stand it. They laughed because they didn't know what else to do when faced with someone they couldn't manipulate. Now they're panicking, wondering how you became unreadable. They used to know exactly how to pull your strings, and suddenly the strings are gone. You don't flinch anymore. You don't argue. You don't chase closure or seek validation. You just know. And that knowing is lethal to people who survive on your reactions. You're no longer reactive, you're selective. You decide what gets your energy, what earns your words, and who deserves your presence. That shift alone destroyed the entire illusion they built around you. They call it arrogance now, but it's really self-command. You've become emotionally bulletproof, and that unsettles them. Because people who rely on confusion as power lose all leverage when you stop being confused. You can almost see it in their faces now, that flicker of disbelief when they realize their favorite buttons don't work anymore. That's the moment they realize you were never naive. You were simply observing. Let them talk about how you've changed. They don't understand that growth feels like rebellion to those committed to misunderstanding you. Let them say you became distant. You're not distant, you're discerning. You stopped explaining things to people committed to missing the point, and that decision turned you from their target into their teacher. My chosen ones, I know you sometimes wonder, was I too quiet? Should I have fought harder? You fought in the smartest way possible, with awareness, not chaos. You mastered the art of knowing when not to engage. You turned silence into strategy. You let their projections expose them while you stayed grounded in clarity. That's not weakness, that's evolution. Now they're the ones explaining themselves. They're the ones rewriting stories, scrambling to make sense of how the person they once looked down on now stands unbothered, calm, untouchable. You didn't humiliate them, their own actions did. You just stopped participating in the version of you they invented. They played themselves thinking you'd stay predictable, but you grew unpredictable by choice. You don't move emotionally anymore, you move intelligently. You respond only when it aligns with your purpose, not their provocation. That's real power. That's the power that shakes people who depend on reaction to feel relevant. So, chosen ones, stand in that calm. Let your silence make them nervous. Let your restraint confuse them. Because the loudest one might control the room for a moment, but the quiet one controls the outcome. And you are the outcome they never prepared for. 2, you evolved. So quietly that their imagination couldn't keep up. You evolved. So quietly that their imagination couldn't keep up, and now they're choking on the shock. They kept replaying the last chapter you left behind, never realizing you'd already written a whole new book. My chosen ones, listen closely. They thought they had you figured out. They built their confidence around the idea that you would stay exactly where they left you. Predictable, hesitant, unsure. They talked about you in past tense, like your story had ended. But what they never understood is that you were only in a transformation phase, not a dead end. While they stood still, locked in loops of their own ego and gossip, you were quietly reinventing yourself behind closed doors. You weren't posting your progress, you were building your power. They tried to box you in because it made them comfortable to believe you were small. They defined you by your past, by mistakes, by moments when you were still learning who you were. But evolution doesn't ask for permission. You outgrew every label they tried to stick on you, not out of spite, but out of necessity. You realized that the old version of you was never meant to be permanent. You let go of it like a snake sheds its skin. No announcement, no warning, just transformation. And now, look at them, confused, speechless. The same people who laughed at you now stumble over their words when your name comes up. They don't recognize you anymore, and that's the sweetest irony, because you didn't change to impress them. You changed because your old environment no longer matched your vision. You became sharper, calmer, more strategic. You started thinking 3 levels deeper, speaking less, observing more, and choosing peace over chaos. They kept running laps around the same problems while you built new worlds. They kept rehearsing their old drama while you were outgrowing the script. And here's what hurts them the most. They were so certain you'd never outpace them that they didn't even try to evolve themselves. You left the race completely, and now they're competing with a ghost. Every time they throw shade, they aim at someone who doesn't even exist anymore. That's why their words fall flat, because they're talking to the past while you're living in the future. My dear chosen ones, this is the moment where your silence speaks louder than their entire narrative. You don't have to argue for your growth. You don't have to prove your transformation to people who never expected it. Just let your elevation expose their stagnation. They thought your evolution would be visible, flashy, loud, public, but you moved like water, unseen, unstoppable, reshaping everything in your path. Now when they see you, they don't know how to act. The old jokes don't land, the old tone doesn't work. You're not playing the role they rehearsed for you. You've rewritten the entire dynamic. You've stripped them of their power by simply becoming unrecognizable to their old perception. They're standing there trying to interact with your former self, and you're already 10 versions ahead. You've become the walking proof that growth is the most dangerous revenge. You didn't clap back, you evolved forward. You didn't shout to be heard. You became so elevated that their opinions echo beneath you. That's why they're silent now. Not because they respect you, but because they can't categorize you anymore. And that, chosen ones, is the real victory. When your growth outpaces their imagination, when your silence becomes your announcement, and when the only thing they can do is watch, wondering how the person they once dismissed turned into the version of power they'll never catch up to. Number 3, you didn't just prove them wrong. You made their entire script irrelevant. You didn't just prove them wrong, you made their entire storyline extinct. They built a version of you out of rumors, and you turned it into their biggest embarrassment. My dear chosen ones, this is the part where your silence becomes poetic justice. You didn't argue, you didn't defend, and you didn't waste breath explaining your evolution to people still trapped in yesterday's version of you. They wrote your obituary, and you turned it into your origin story. You didn't just prove them wrong, you made their entire script irrelevant. Every rumor, every label, every small-minded assumption they clung to like gospel fell apart the moment you stopped fitting their expectations. They were so sure they had you figured out. They built their confidence around your supposed limitations, like a fragile house made of gossip and cheap talk. And when you changed the blueprint, their entire structure collapsed. That's what happens when people mistake a snapshot for the full film. They froze you in a moment that no longer exists, and now they look ridiculous trying to debate your present using their outdated notes from your past. You didn't destroy them. You evolved. You refined your thinking, healed your wounds, rebuilt your focus, and did it all without announcing every move. That's what burns them. You transformed off camera. They were busy narrating your downfall while you were quietly designing your comeback. They were gossiping, you were growing, they were talking in circles, you were building in silence. Now they're stuck arguing with a ghost, because the version of you they tried to define doesn't even live here anymore. Chosen ones, understand this. You don't have to clap back when your existence itself is the loudest rebuttal. You don't have to expose anyone when time does the job better. The truth always ages well, and your growth aged like fine steel, strong, sharp, and undeniable. While they were rehearsing lines from the past, you were writing an entirely new chapter, one they don't have the vocabulary to comprehend. And here's what stings them the most. You didn't grow for revenge. You didn't evolve to prove anything. You did it because stagnation bored you, because peace became more important than proving a point, because clarity mattered more than being right. And that kind of evolution makes people uncomfortable. They can't understand how someone they dismissed turned into someone they can't stop watching. Now look at them. Their insults sound outdated. Their stories have holes and their silence. That's confession disguised as pride. They'll never admit it, but they know you won. Not with noise, but with transformation. Not with arguments, but with evidence. Your results are the receipts. Your composure is the clapback. Your success, internal and external, is the verdict. You became the kind of person their old narratives can't reach. You speak a different emotional language now. You don't react to their projections. You outthink them. You don't chase their approval. You've outgrown the need for it. And that is what breaks them, not your words, but your absence from their drama. Let them talk to their old stories. Let them debate your shadow. Let them whisper to the empty version of you they invented. Because every sentence they speak about who you are just exposes how little they've evolved. You've moved past being the target of their opinions and stepped into being the proof that time reveals everything. So hold your ground, chosen ones. You don't need to correct the record when your life has already done it. You don't need to win the argument when the scoreboard is your piece. You didn't just silence the critics. You made their entire reality obsolete, and that's the kind of victory that doesn't fade. Number 4, while they recycled insults, you rewired the entire operating system of your mind. While they recycled the same old insults, you rewired the entire operating system of your mind. They kept pressing the same buttons, never realizing you changed the whole control panel. My dear chosen ones, this is where the game truly shifted. They thought they could keep you trapped in an old version of yourself. The one who used to explain too much, react too fast, take things too personally. They thought they could hit the same emotional triggers and get the same predictable reaction. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being predictable. You started studying yourself with the same intensity they used to study your weaknesses. While they were mocking you, you were upgrading your mental software. You deleted the old programming that said, "Be nice even when it hurts. Stay quiet to keep the peace. Shrink so others feel comfortable." You replaced it with a new code, one built on awareness, self-respect, and emotional precision. They were recycling the same tired lines, hoping you'd crumble. Same tone, same digs, same tired tricks. But you didn't respond this time, did you? You didn't flinch. You didn't try to prove them wrong. You just looked at them, calm, unreadable, detached. And in that silence, they saw something terrifying. They no longer had access to your emotions. The old version of you would have fought to be understood. The new you doesn't waste breath explaining truth to people committed to misunderstanding it. That shift broke their illusion of control. Chosen ones, this is what evolution looks like. Not loud revenge, but quiet rewiring. You didn't just grow stronger, you grew smarter. You started recognizing patterns in your thoughts, the same way you recognized patterns in people. You began to notice when your mind slipped into old habits, overthinking, seeking approval, replaying pain, and you rewrote those scripts. You stopped asking, "Why are they like this?" and started asking, "Why do I keep allowing it?" That single shift changed everything. You see, when you rewire your mind, you don't just outgrow people. You outgrow your old responses. You don't need to clap back. You don't need to prove you've changed. Your energy announces it for you. Your calm is louder than their insults. Your composure is your comeback. They don't know how to handle it because chaos can't stand peace. It needs a reaction to survive. But you don't feed it anymore. And here's what really confuses them. You're no longer running on emotion. You're powered by awareness. You're operating on a mental frequency that they can't even tune into. Their words bounce off you because they're speaking the language of limitation, and you've upgraded to fluency in clarity. You're not fighting the same battles anymore because your battlefield has moved from defending yourself to mastering yourself. Now, when they throw shade, you just smile. Not a mocking smile, but the smile of someone who finally understands. They're repeating the same insults because that's all they know. Meanwhile, you've rebuilt your entire mindset, turned pain into perspective, and replaced reaction with reflection. They can't trigger what no longer exists. My chosen ones, remember this, they stayed predictable, you became unreadable. They kept looping the same storyline, and you rewrote the entire script. They're still rehearsing insults while you're designing blueprints for a future they'll never be invited into. That's what happens when you rewire your mind. You stop needing to win arguments and start winning at life. So let them keep talking. Let them recycle their old strategies. They're stuck on repeat while you're in constant upgrade mode. You didn't just survive their noise, you turned it into the background music of your transformation. You outsmarted the pattern, outgrew the trap, and built a mind they'll never be able to reach again. Number 5. You became the antidote to every manipulation that tried to control you. You became the glitch in their game, the cure to their control, and that's why they fear you now. The moment you stop reacting, manipulators lose their oxygen. My dear chosen ones, this is where the tables truly turn. They thought they could shape your reality, twist your emotions, and rewrite how you saw yourself. That's what manipulators do. They build illusions, not relationships. They create storms just to sell you the umbrella. They pull strings from behind the curtain, thinking you'll dance to the same tune forever. But what they didn't realize is that you were watching. You were decoding every trick, every guilt trip, every half smile that came with hidden intent. You weren't just surviving their mind games. You were studying the architecture of manipulation itself. They built their entire identity around control, while you built yours around clarity. And that's what terrifies them now. Clarity cuts through control like light through fog. You became immune to their tone switches, their guilt traps, their emotional bait. You started seeing the cycle before it even began. The same patterns that once caught you now serve as warning signs. You can feel manipulation in the air before a single word is spoken, like catching the static before a storm. That's not paranoia, that's pattern recognition. That's awareness earned through experience. Chosen ones, you didn't become this wise by accident. You were forged in rooms where words were weapons, where fake concern came dressed as care, and where smiling faces hid silent envy. You learned the hard way that not every "I'm just worried about you" means love. Sometimes it's just control in costume. And instead of breaking under that, you transformed. You learned the language of manipulation so fluently that now no one can speak it around you without stuttering. They thought you'd always need them, their approval, their validation, their version of your story. But you cut that cord. That's what breaks them. Because manipulators need reaction to survive. The moment you stopped reacting, they lost their favorite toy, your energy. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped defending yourself. You stopped proving your worth to people who benefit from keeping you unsure of it. That's the day the power balance flipped. Now, your silence unsettles them. Your calm exposes their chaos. When you walk into a room, they can feel that you see through everything. You don't need to call out the lie. Your presence already does it. They can't hide in distortion anymore because you're clarity itself, and clarity is fatal to deceit. They don't fear confrontation, they fear exposure, and your awareness is the mirror they can't face. Chosen ones, remember, you didn't become cold, you became conscious. You didn't build walls, you built filters. You don't isolate yourself out of fear, you guard your peace out of wisdom. They mistake your boundaries for arrogance because they're used to you being accessible to their chaos. But now, they're learning the hard truth. You no longer negotiate your energy with confusion. You flipped the script. You're no longer the one being trained, you're the trainer. You read people like open books now. You can spot manipulation wrapped in compliments, deceit dressed as concern, and control masked as help. That's real power. That's mental independence. And that's why they can't stand next to you anymore, because truth doesn't coexist with tactics. You didn't just resist manipulation, you became its antidote. You broke the loop. You're the one they can't gaslight, guilt, or ghost into silence anymore. You control the temperature, the timing, and the tone of every interaction you allow. That composure, it's your crown. That awareness, it's your weapon. And that calm that once made you a target, it's now the shield that keeps you untouchable. They can't function in your clarity anymore, chosen ones, because lies can't breathe where truth lives. And you, my dear chosen one, you are the truth they never prepared to face. Number 6, you silenced the noise. Not with revenge, but with undeniable receipts. You didn't shout for justice, you let the truth do the talking. Never wrestle with a liar. Just outlast them until their own words turn into the rope they hang their story with. My dear chosen ones, there comes a moment when the noise gets so loud you could drown in it. Accusations, whispers, rumors, all designed to test your composure. They thought their volume was power. They believed the crowd would side with whoever spoke first and loudest. But you knew better. You understood that real power doesn't come from defending lies, it comes from living truth. So while they were busy shouting, you were building. While they were spinning stories, you were collecting evidence, not the petty kind, not screenshots or gossip, but the kind of receipts that only time can print. You saw every inconsistency, every fake apology, every sudden shift in tone when the spotlight turned your way. You took mental notes, catalogued behaviors, mapped patterns. You learned who smiled when you were up and who grinned wider when you stumbled. You didn't call them out. You simply took notes and kept moving. That's what separates the chosen ones from the crowd. Your silence isn't weakness. It's observation. You weren't ignoring it, you were archiving it. They told their version of you, painted you with lies dipped in arrogance, and expected it to stick. But here's the thing about lies. They age poorly. The truth, however, doesn't need marketing. It just waits for the right moment to walk in and flip every table that was built against you. When that moment came, you didn't raise your voice. You didn't post paragraphs trying to defend yourself. You simply showed up, calm, composed, undeniable. Your work, your growth, your results became the loudest proof of all. Chosen ones, remember this. People who lie about you always reveal more about themselves than they do about you. Their stories collapse because they can't sustain the weight of your reality. They thought you'd clap back, argue, or lose control, but you didn't. You played the long game. You let consistency be your revenge. You didn't need validation. You became the validation. And when the smoke cleared, what was left? Their contradictions hanging in the air with no foundation. Their followers confused, their credibility cracked. Because the truth doesn't shout, it echoes. It seeps through every corner of your progress until even those who doubted you start to question the narrative they once believed. You silenced them not by dragging them down, but by rising so high they couldn't reach your level. You didn't destroy them. They self-destructed trying to keep up with the version of you they invented. You didn't fight back with anger. You answered with evidence, your discipline, your evolution, your undeniable growth. Now they watch you from afar, quiet, unsure how to explain why their version of you doesn't exist anymore. They underestimated the power of patience. They forgot that silence has a memory, and you used every quiet moment to sharpen your truth. So, chosen ones, when people lie about you, don't chase every rumor. Let your life cross-examine them. Let your results testify. Let your peace be the gavel that closes the case. Because at the end of the day, the truth doesn't need your defense. It just needs your consistency, and that's what you've mastered. You didn't silence them with noise. You silenced them with proof. And nothing hits harder than reality, standing tall while their fiction crumbles into dust. Number 7. You stopped competing and started operating on a frequency they can't access. You left the race. They're still running in circles. They can't compete where they don't even understand the game. My dear chosen ones, let's make something clear. You were never built for their race. They sprinted for applause while you walked in purpose. They chased visibility. You chased mastery. They tried to win crowds. You tried to win clarity. And that difference right there, that's why they can't touch you anymore. Because while they were auditioning for validation, you were constructing an empire of focus behind closed doors. You didn't need a spotlight. You became the light. They thought life was a popularity contest where the loudest wins. So they ran in circles, chasing trends, faking peace, selling illusions. But you, chosen one, you were building quietly in the shadows. You were doing what they couldn't even name, real internal work. The kind that doesn't post well, but shows well. You were rewiring your mindset, detoxing from external noise, cutting ties with your old triggers, and mastering self-awareness. They were busy networking, you were busy evolving, and now they feel it. They can't describe it, but they feel the shift. That subtle, unsettling truth that you've outgrown the environment they still worship. They look at you and think, why do they seem so different now? So untouchable. It's because you're no longer tuned into their frequency. You've stopped playing by rules built on insecurity. You don't measure your worth in views, applause, or fake approval anymore. Your validation comes from peace, not people. They wanted to win followers. You wanted to win freedom, and that's why you don't flinch when they try to bait you into comparison. You've realized that competition is a cage disguised as ambition. You're in the same room, yes, but on a completely different wavelength. Their moves are loud and desperate. Yours are silent and calculated. They play for attention. You move for alignment. And that's why they can't predict you anymore, because you're not playing their game. You're designing your own arena. Chosen ones, the funny part? They keep trying to decode you using the same outdated logic that built their world. But your mind doesn't work on ego fuel. You don't crave validation. You crave truth. You don't chase relevance. You embody it. That's what leaves them uneasy, because you've become the kind of person they pretend to be online. They think silence means surrender, but you know silence means strategy. They think detachment means coldness, but it's clarity. You're not ignoring them. You're simply uninterested in noise. You've stopped trying to prove your worth to people who profit off misunderstanding it. That's evolution they can't fathom. You've reached a level where arguing feels pointless, where proving anything feels beneath you. You're no longer tempted by every comment, every jab, every fake smile. You see it all, but it no longer moves you, because peace is now your competitive edge. You've realized that real intelligence doesn't announce itself. It simply becomes undeniable. They don't get it. They think you disappeared when really you ascended. You're operating in clarity while they're still operating in confusion. You're building in silence while they're performing for noise. And here's the truth. That kind of difference can't be explained to those who haven't done the inner work to meet you there. So let them talk. Let them analyze the mystery you've become. You don't owe them access, explanation, or response. You've leveled out of their league entirely. And that's the ultimate shock. Not that you won the race, but that you stopped running altogether. Number 8. You studied the patterns until the game itself became predictable. You cracked the code while they were still repeating the script. Once you learn the pattern, you stop reacting to chaos. You start predicting it. My dear chosen ones, let this sink in. You were never naive. You were strategic in silence. They mistook your patience for confusion, your kindness for gullibility, and your calm for weakness. They thought they were running circles around you while you were quietly standing at the center, watching their every move like a scientist tracking behavioral data. You weren't lost. You were logging evidence. Every fake apology, every guilt trip, every emotional bait was a clue. You weren't ignoring red flags. You were building a map, a psychological map that now lets you see the game before it even begins. That's what they'll never understand. You were never studying people just to figure them out. You were studying patterns. Because once you master the pattern, the player becomes predictable. You started noticing the timing of their apologies, the rhythm of their excuses, the recycled words they use to regain control. And now, they can't surprise you anymore. They don't even realize you're 3 steps ahead of them in a conversation they think they're controlling. They're still acting. You're already reading the script. Chosen ones, that's how you became unplayable. You stopped needing closure because you learned the formula. You stopped expecting honesty from liars because you understood repetition isn't loyalty, it's habit. You stopped asking why and started asking when, because you realized their behavior wasn't personal, it was patterned. And when you understand a pattern, it loses power over you. You no longer walk into traps, you watch them build them. You no longer get blindsided, you already predicted the scene. That's why your silence now feels dangerous, because they can't manipulate what they can't read. They used to think your empathy made you easy to fool. They didn't realize empathy, when mastered, becomes data awareness. You can sense the shift in tone before a lie is told. You notice the small pauses, the way they blink when they distort truth, the tension in their laugh when they cover discomfort. You read what others miss, not with suspicion, but with precision. And that's what unsettles them, because now you don't just listen to words, you listen to energy. You don't just remember actions, you remember patterns. They call you distant now because you don't react. But it's not distance, it's decoding. You're not detached, you're aware. You know that some people apologize not to fix things, but to reset access. You know that some smiles hide intent. You know that some kindness is bait. And because you know, you can't be fooled. You've graduated from the school of human behavior with honors, paid for in silence, observation, and pain. And now they can't stand it, because every tactic that once worked on you now bounces off like a dull blade on armor. They bring the same lies, the same manipulations, the same emotional theatrics. And they fall flat. They don't even understand why. But you do, because you ran the simulation in your head long before they tried it. You've seen this movie too many times to cry at the same scene. My chosen ones, that's real evolution. When your discernment becomes preventative instead of reactive, when you no longer need to heal from manipulation because you see it before it reaches you. You don't walk into chaos hoping to survive, you walk around it, unbothered. That's not paranoia, that's precision. You've learned to read silence louder than words, patterns louder than promises, energy louder than excuses. And that's why you can't be played again. You became the one variable they can't predict, the one player who no longer plays. And to those who built their power on your confusion, that realization is terrifying, because the moment you cracked the code, the game ended. Number 9. You outgrew the narrative they wrote and authored your own revolution. You outsmarted the story. They tried to trap you in, and now their words sound like yesterday's noise. They wrote your obituary while you were still busy building the empire they said would never exist. My chosen ones, listen closely. They didn't just underestimate you, they tried to narrate you. They thought they could define you with whispers, twist your truth into entertainment, and label you with words that felt too small to contain your reality. They built a story around you, one-sided, narrow, predictable, and expected you to stay obedient to it. But what they never understood is that real power doesn't argue with false storytellers. Real power rewrites quietly. You didn't need to defend your name in their version. You simply changed the entire plot. At first they were convincing. Their narrative was polished with half-truths, edited with bias, and amplified by gossip. You were painted as the one who failed, the one who lost control, the one who would never rise again. And maybe for a while you stayed silent. Maybe you even doubted yourself for a moment. But here's the turning point. You realized you were never meant to play the role they assigned. You were born to author your own story. So instead of reacting, you retreated into focus. You stopped explaining. You stopped performing. You started creating. Every move you made after that was a plot twist they didn't see coming. You took the insults and turned them into insight. You took the silence they left you in and used it to sharpen your thinking. They expected you to collapse under the weight of their lies, but you built a new foundation out of their disbelief. And now, the same mouths that spoke so confidently about your downfall have gone quiet, because the story they wrote doesn't match the life you're living. Chosen ones understand this. Small minds need characters to criticize because it distracts them from the emptiness of their own script. They crave villains because they don't have the courage to be their own heroes. So when they couldn't understand you, they reimagined you as something safer, something smaller, something they could manage. But the truth has a way of outlasting fiction. You didn't have to expose them. You simply evolved until their version of you expired. Now, when your name comes up in their conversations, it feels outdated, like they're describing a ghost that doesn't exist anymore. They're still arguing about a chapter you already closed. And that's what drives them mad. They can't update the story because they lost access to the author, you. You took the pen back, and you never gave it up again. Think about it. Every setback they mocked became a training montage. Every loss they celebrated became a redirection. Every insult they threw became a quote you'll use later to remind yourself how far you've come. They tried to define you with limitation, but you redefined yourself with evolution. That's how you win without confrontation, by becoming someone they can't write about anymore because the truth has outgrown their vocabulary. My chosen ones, this is the real victory. You didn't clap back. You outgrew the entire conversation. You became too advanced for their narrative to contain. And that's why their words sound weaker now, because they're speaking to a version of you that doesn't even live there anymore. So let them talk about the old you. Let them recycle their outdated stories. Every time they do, it just proves one thing. You've moved on, and they haven't. You didn't just outsmart the narrative. You deleted the illusion that they ever controlled it. You're not a chapter in their book. You're the whole library they can't enter anymore. Number 10. You took every bit of pressure and forged it into precision power. They turned up the heat, and you forged a mind too sharp to break. Pressure doesn't destroy diamonds. It identifies who was never built to be one. My chosen ones, this is the part they never expected. They thought the pressure would crush you, not realizing it was creating a weapon of focus inside your mind. Every rumor, every insult, every subtle attempt to break your confidence was fuel, the kind that doesn't burn out but burns through. They sent the heat, but you built the forge. And inside that heat, you were reshaping yourself into something stronger, quieter, and far more dangerous to underestimate. When they gossiped, you listened, not to believe them, but to study the anatomy of ignorance. When they doubted you, you didn't collapse, you calibrated. You began to see how easily people project their fears onto others, how their judgment says more about their insecurities than your worth. Every attempt to make you small became a reminder of how deeply they feared your potential. That's why they talked. That's why they poked. It was never about you. It was about controlling what they couldn't understand. But here's where they slipped. They underestimated how adaptive you are under pressure. You don't just survive storms, you adjust the weather. You learned to convert criticism into clarity. Every time someone questioned your worth, you sharpened your awareness. Every time someone whispered your name behind your back, you refined your understanding of human nature. You didn't just grow thicker skin, you built an entire mental armor that's flexible, strategic, and unshakable. And now, look at you. When chaos hits, you don't panic, you observe. You've learned that most people fold under pressure because they were never built to think under fire. You, on the other hand, learned to breathe there, to pause in the middle of heat and say, "This is my training ground." That's the difference between someone who reacts and someone who evolves. You evolved. You learned to extract lessons from pain, patterns from conflict, and direction from every attempt to push you off course. Chosen ones, think about it. All that pressure wasn't punishment, it was preparation. They didn't know that while they were testing your limits, they were expanding them. Their rejection refined your focus. Their jealousy fine-tuned your intuition. Their lies forced you to develop discernment so sharp that manipulation now collapses on contact. You turned their negativity into material for growth, into the raw elements of resilience that ordinary people can't manufacture. Now your mind cuts through confusion like a blade honed in silence. You don't waste energy proving yourself. You don't chase explanations. You think in systems, patterns, and probabilities. You see every setback as a simulation, a chance to upgrade your thinking, and because of that, you've become mentally agile, emotionally balanced, and impossible to control. They wanted to break your confidence, but all they did was build your command. They wanted you to doubt yourself, but now your self-awareness terrifies them. They wanted to weaken your voice, but now your calm speaks louder than their noise ever did. Pressure was never your enemy, it was your mentor wearing a disguise. And you, my chosen ones, were the only ones intelligent enough to see the lesson inside the fire. So now, when they look at you and whisper, "How did they get so sharp?" you can smile and say, "You taught me." They handed you the pressure and you turned it into power. They gave you the heat and you forged yourself into something that no one can shatter. A mind that sees everything, absorbs nothing toxic, and keeps evolving. That's what makes you unstoppable. And now, my chosen ones, as we close this chapter, take a breath and let that power sink in. You didn't just silence the critics, you rewired the entire narrative they built about you. Every insult became data, every doubt became fuel, every attempt to break you only taught you how to build yourself stronger. The truth is, they never stood a chance against someone who studies, evolves, and rises in silence. You are the quiet storm they never saw coming, the calm before the shock. And from this point on, you don't owe explanations, you don't chase validation, and you don't seek revenge. Your growth is the proof. If this message hit that nerve, that spark deep inside you that says, "This is me," then don't scroll away. Lock in right here. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and drop the number 77 in the comments to let the world know you've taken your power back for good. And if you know someone who's been underestimated, share this with them, because chosen ones recognize chosen ones. Stay sharp, stay strategic, and keep shocking them with your smartness. Your story isn't over, it's just getting louder in silence.